Hello, YouTube. This is the Fighting Nerd and his co-host, Jolly Roger. And I like knives. And what I want to do is explain to you why I like knives and why a lot of other edged weapon enthusiasts like knives and swords and other sharp, pointy things. It's not that we're psychotic or that we're out to hurt people or we like cutting into things. Although cutting practice on nice, safe, non-looking targets can be a lot of fun. But I find that when I tell people that I collect knives, that I am an edged weapons enthusiast, you get this look from them. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I should take a few steps back in case I have to run. Now you can tell people that you collect coins, you collect stamps, you collect beer cans. You can even tell them you collect guns and not get the reaction of I collect knives. So I'm going to run through the reasons I like knives. Edged weapons have a history that goes back, to before man's civilization, really. The stone axe was probably the first piece of actual technology that mankind developed. Some would say the club, but the club was usually a bone or a big stick that they picked up and used as an impact weapon. But a stone axe was something they shaped out of a piece of obsidian or other glass. They took something that wasn't sharp and made it sharp, and therefore made it more useful. And then they put that sharp rock on the end of the big stick, and they really had something. That edged weapon was also a tool, and it allowed us to go from being prey to being predator. And also it allowed us to cut trees and build better shelters. Eventually, it allowed us to develop the civilization we had. And for me, I'm also an avid student of history. And I think that being able to trace the evolution of mankind's weaponry is a really good framework for studying his development through history as a society. The stone axe, in a lot of ways, was the foundation of all the technology. The webcam I'm using right now. It was the first time that we had shaped our environment in a meaningful way to make progress into what we are now, what mankind is now. And an example of that is this kukri. Now the kukri is the signature weapon of the Gurkha warrior. Now the Gurkhas are native to Nepal. During the British colonial expeditions into the region of Nepal, they came into conflict with the Gurkha. And the Gurkhas so impressed the British that they basically made a deal. They hired the British hired the Gurkha as soldiers, mercenaries. But the relationship was different than most mercenary employer relationships. There was a mutual respect and friendship that developed between the British Army and the Gurkha that exists to this day. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship. The Gurkhas were renowned for the courage. I really think that you should research the Gurkhas. I'm going to put a link at the end of this video to an excellent documentary about the Gurkha. It's well worth well worth watching. But the thing is that the Gurkha fighting along for the British, and they also are used by the government of India, and I believe, Singapore. But But the Gurkhas were renowned warriors, and the history of the Gurkha is just incredible. They fought alongside British forces in World War I, World War II, Malaysia, and a lot of other colonial campaigns. They fought in the Falkland Islands War, and they are fighting now in Afghanistan with the British, alongside the British. And they've been involved in pretty much every conflict that the British Army has been involved with since the 19th century. And this is their signature blade. Now for me, this gives me a tangible link to that history. This particular Gurkha, this particular kukri was actually hand forged in Nepal by a hereditarily trained blacksmith that comes from the ex-Gurkha kukri house. And I don't know if you can see it, but you might actually be able to see the hammer marks in this blade. So I can hold this knife and know a little bit, get a sense of what it was like to be, I can't say what it was like to be a Gurkha, that would be an overstatement. But I can get a sense of the Gurkha mentality. For one thing, this was also a tool. They were using these long before they ever signed on with the British. Gurkha men had one of these everywhere. There are all kinds of different sizes of these. But it was something they used every day. Now think about living in an environment when you had to carry one of these as a day-to-day implement for living your life. And then of course, the British Army had so much respect for the Gurkhas that they actually had these factory produced to issue to the Gurkha regiments. And imagine what it would be like in World War I, for instance, to go into a trench with one of these in one hand and your rifle in the other, in close quarter combat, using your rifle to block bayonet thrust, saber thrusts, and then actually cutting into human flesh with one of these. You can hold that and get an inkling of the mentality of the people that developed this blade and used it. So that's the historical aspect of why I collect blades. The same thing can be said for the Bowie knife. The Bowie is an American icon. If you say Bowie knife, people get the idea of a knife of this pattern, this general type of knife. It bears the name of an iconic figure in American history, James Bowie, of course. And you can hold this and think about the start of his fame at the sandbar fight, where he had basically a glorified kitchen knife, and how his experience in that fight, in which he was wounded several times and still fought his way out of a nasty situation. Again, that's something you could look up yourselves. But this knife went on to be used in the frontier. It became kind of a status symbol in a lot of ways. If the Winchester 73 rifle was the gun that won the West, the Bowie pattern knife was the knife that won the West. And I can hold this reproduction and think what it's like to have one of these on my hip every day. To be a mountain man running a trap line. To be a pioneer using this knife for processing a game animal he's just killed, or perhaps defending himself against some sort of an attack by bandits or American Indians or whatever. But this is a way that I can connect with history in a very tactile, physical way. it makes history slightly less abstract, excuse me. Now, also with knives and other edged weapons, there is a mystique to them that, say, firearms doesn't have. And that's because they're essentially artificial teeth and claws. We don't have effective claws as a species anymore. Our teeth are pretty much worthless as offensive or defensive weapons. That's not the way our species developed. We developed artificial claws and teeth. So we're saying that, again, that's what allowed us to go from being prey to predator. And there's a mystique and there's a fear of edged weapons that supersedes fear of being shot or even being hit by an arrow. There's something about facing an edged weapon that elicits the kind of the old primal fear of being eaten, killed and eaten, because it's a tooth, it's a claw. And conversely, when you hold a weapon, you get that. When you hold an edged weapon, you get that primal. I guess that primal sense of power that says, I'm not going to be eaten. I am no longer prey. I am not a victim. And that leads, all through history, that edged weapons were status symbols, symbols of authority, as much as they were viable weapons. Bearing in mind that the firearm has only been a real viable personal combat tool for 4 or 5 years, depending on which early firearm you think was actually a viable weapon, and whether it was just kind of what types of weapons were just kind of a learning experience, say the matchlock, for instance. So that's where I'm coming from on that. Officers in the military are still issuing ceremonial swords. It's a sign of authority. Some pagan and Wiccan practitioners still use an Athame knife. They don't use a Glock 17 or a Glock 22 or a 6 Sauer to perform their rituals and enter their circles, enter their sacred circles. They use a blade in their ceremonies. So there's this connection not only with just history, but that primal sense of self when we started to become the dominant species on the planet. It had to do with something sharp that we could defend ourselves against the wolves and the saber-toothed cats and the short-faced bears. And all of that comes in to the last thing, which is you can look at a blade like something very distinctive, like the kukri. And once you start really learning about the design philosophies, the history of where the knife was made and by who, and how different shapes of blades and weights affect how knives are used, you get an idea of how those people fought, because they designed edged weapons to suit their particular need in their culture, in their geographic area, and whatever enemies that they had to fight. And by understanding how they fought, you can get an understanding of how they thought. So all of that is my reason for liking edged weapons so much, particularly knives, because so much of what we are is founded on them. And of course also a well-made knife, even a well-made knife from a Chinese factory, has a level of precision. And since they want to sell blades, and a lot of people like me go by aesthetics when they buy a blade, right? They can be a beautiful thing, but they're beauty in form and function. And that's it. It's not when people collect edge weapons, it's not that they're into violence necessarily. They're not into hurting people. For me, and I think a lot of other people, it's about this connection to history, and it's about connection to that inner predator, and that inner prey, that fear of being something's prey. The connection to that primal part of mankind is still important. That primal drive, when the need to survive, and survival itself, day-to-day survival, wasn't a hobby, and it wasn't a sport. It was an everyday reality. So there you go. That's the whole thing about me and edge weapons and knives. And I think I speak for at least a few other people that are into knives and other edge weapons. And so I'm going to keep this video a lot shorter than the last one I did. The last one ran over almost half an hour, which was a little bit much. So I'm going to be signing off along with my co-host, Jolly Roger. Remember, folks, draw your blades only in just purpose, and sheathe them only with honor. This is the Fighting Nerd. Good night.